I mentioned a little bit earlier that when I was in university, I was asked at one point who inspires me and who I would like to be like when I grow up. And that was the time when I first read about Cindy Blackstock and being spied on by the government and all of that crazy stuff. And she was honestly the one that I chose. I chose her as I want to do that. I want to be able to do what's right for our kids. And coming from also being one of those children in care, so it really hits home for me. And I really am so privileged to work alongside our next speaker. So Cindy Blackstock is a member of the Gitxsan First Nation. She is honored to serve as the Executive Director of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society and a professor at McGill University's School of Social Work. She has over 30 years of experience working in child welfare and Indigenous children's rights, has published on topics related to reconciliation, Indigenous theory, First Nations child welfare, and human rights. Cindy is frequently cited the company of the Caring Society's Reconciliation and Barrister Spirit Bear, engaging children in meaningful actions to implement the TRC calls to action. Please welcome Dr. Cindy Blackstock.
What a great honor to be with all of you on the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam Nation lands. And we're here to talk about loving justice. And Elmer Crochane, the late Elmer Crochane, knew much more about that than I do. But this is what I learned from him. He said that children don't just need justice, they need loving justice. And what does that ask of all of us? Well, children make us love more, as we see from the Grand Chief, than we ever thought was possible. That love pushes us to ask more of ourselves, to be a better person than we ever thought we could be, to pull up our bootstraps when it really matters. We want to be their superhero, the one that comes in and saves them when they're scared, when they maybe feel a little bit unconfident, and when they just need a hug and a high five because they did a great job, and on every day in between. Children are sacred. Elder Croce once told me, he said, you know, Cindy, a lot of people spend a lot of time doing the wrong thing. They try to teach kids to talk, but they don't realize they're going to talk anyway. They try to teach kids to walk, and they don't realize they're probably going to walk anyway. He said, no. He said, children are closest to the ancestors, and just like Mary's wise mother. He said, your job as a parent is not to teach them those things. It's to learn how to babble again. Because babbling is the language of the ancestors. Children are the keepers of the possible. We're devoted to loving them above all else as our lives fade in toward the ancestors. Their lives become more important and bright, and they cast a shadow to the future. Children are among the most courageous people I've ever seen. They will see the wrong even when adults don't. They'll be the superhero to their brother or sister who's scared even when the adults aren't there. They need to see us. If we talk about jurisdiction, they need to see us be super brave. We need to show them that we love them enough to embrace the things that hurt within us, within our families and within our nations. To talk courageously about what we need to fix for ourselves. And yes, no, it didn't come from all of us, but it is ours now. The great Terry Cross said, jurisdiction is not something you sign. It's not a thing with the minister. Who cares about the ministers? You need to embrace what hurts. That's what jurisdiction really means. And that means to be humble, you need to own your own place, that small link in the chain you are in the long continuum of history and ancestors and children yet to come. Our most important job is not really to fall in love with our children or even our grandchildren or even our great-grandchildren. Our job in this room is to fall in love with the generation we will never know and will never know to be thankful to us. Children are experts in love and fairness, and I've seen it. Think of the children in residential schools who remembered against all odds a few words in the language or a few values so that those can be spoken by children today. We owe them a great debt, and that debt is only payable when we ensure that their generations to come can live proudly and honorably and safely as them. That's when that debt is paid. Think about Jordan River Anderson. I'm going to be leaving you with Spirit Bearer in a few hours. And tomorrow, with the BC Leadership Council, we will be arguing against the Canadian government in a non-compliance motion because they're violating the sacred spirit of that little boy. And sadly, some of our people are standing with the government. And that's where we have to have that courageous conversation amongst ourselves, is how do we bridge those views? How do we bring all of us back to that centered place where we really, truly are able to set aside what is good for us in order to do what's best for them? Because it doesn't matter what job you have. At the end of the day, if you can't do that, you haven't fulfilled that link in history that you are. And it's so easy to talk about children without really doing what's best for them. And that's why jurisdiction is so hard. It can't just be that shiny petal in the side. It is not the destination that we are going to. It is only a tool to get there. And if we make that tool the destination, then Canada's trickery will be able to work its magic as it always does. Our destination is not that. Our destination in jurisdiction is to make sure that First Nations children get a fair chance to grow up safely in their families, get a good education, be healthy and proud of who we are. And that's where we're getting there, and jurisdiction is one tool. It's not the destination. So when we talk about loving justice, we got to ask more of ourselves than we ever thought we would. We have to talk the truth, and we have to be honest. And that's why I'm saying to you today that tomorrow we will go and try to honor Jordan River Anderson's spirit, and we ask you to watch those hearings online so that you can hold us accountable for your children. It said, I cannot support the final settlement agreement on child and family services for reasons that we are about to learn. And the third thing is that we need to refashion what we think about jurisdiction so it's not just a trope, that it's actually that embracing of that sacred responsibility for children. So that's what I've learned from people like Elmer, from Elder Crowshoe, from amazing people like Deb Foxcroft and Mary and others. And I also want to put a shout out for those of you who came from Nova Scotia. You are not the furthest people who came here. We have guests here from Australia. And I would ask them to stand up because they flew the longest distance. I think they're in the, there they are. And this is not their first trip.
And New Zealand.
And New Zealand. And we have some people from New Zealand. And I want to recognize Terry Leibsman, because she came in 2012 from Australia to sit in the courtroom and watch the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal case, so that she could stand there in solidarity and we could join hands with people around the world. So let's talk real here. Let's be honest and real with one another. Child welfare is not the problem. I don't think you actually can get jurisdiction in child welfare. Child welfare is a symptom of the problem. The problem is the poverty. The problem is the trauma. The problem is the addictions. The problem is the domestic violence that flows from all that. Those are the problems. And those fires exist in juvenile justice, they exist in mental health, and if we keep on trying to have jurisdiction over child welfare, well, child welfare did not exist. We had other mechanisms. It's like Mary said, we had laws for ourselves to hold ourselves accountable. So when we look at the data, we have 17.2 times more likely of kids to be in care. 72% of those kids are off reserve, right? So the way we think about kids has to be different. We can't just focus on reserve or off reserve. Those days have to be over. We have to look at children, you know? We have to talk about and honor the people who are asked by First Nations to be there for their kids. I hear too much of this First Nations versus agencies trope. This is about supporting the people. First Nations have said, we trust you with our most sacred resource, and we know that you're up against it because the colonial forces have really piled onto our people. And it is hard, hard work, but it is probably the most important job in your nations, and we need to honor those people. Yeah, we do. The needs of First Nations children and families are not going down, they're going up. And that's why Canada is so excited about getting jurisdiction off on child welfare. Because with those needs, so are the costs. And one of the pieces that I really want to say to you is that we have a wonderful thing in Canadian law through Jordan's Principle, the gift of Jordan River Anderson. And that is a definition of a First Nations child for the tribunal that recognizes that child on or off reserve as long as they're recognized by the nation. That sounds pretty good to me. So let's start using that across all these different areas. It's already part of Canadian law. And we got to walk away from the Indian Act. I am a lot of things. Most of all, Spirit Bears employee. But, you know, Canada only knows me by my status number. And that is a card by Canada. And I have not renewed mine since 2003, and I have no plans on doing it. Because I cannot stomach the thought of a great-grandchild being born anywhere and Canada saying you're a non-status Indian. That's not up to them. And we have got to start burning those status cards. That's our jurisdiction. So let's talk about how we reclaim this community law. In one of the things that was the great Marie Batiste said, the biggest thing taking us from colonialism is our ability to dream for ourselves. And we need not just people like myself doing this work, or Mary doing this work, or Raymond, or all these wonderful people, Arlene, all these wonderful people. We do not need just them. We need the community to come together to reimagine what a healthy family is like. Where are we going if we don't know that, right? So back in 2005, we created this thing called Touchstones of Hope. And some of you were there, and it was probably an idea before its time. But the time is now, as far as I'm concerned. And this is about bringing your community together to answer that question for yourselves. There's a process, and it's free, and it's easy to do. People like Deb have done it, I've done it. And it's something that allows that vision to come to shape. And children should be part of it. Children and young people in care, they should all be a part of it. And it's about doing it through this kind of mechanism. You can have your own mechanism. But if you've developed a law that's just based on a few people in a room, you've missed the boat, I think, right? Because a law needs to be owned by all the people. All of us have to be lawmakers in our community. We have to abide by those laws, as Mary's mother has taught us. Those laws are to govern us, right? So we have to have everyone involved in it. And we've done an evaluation. I'm not going to get into it, but you can find it online of the process. And I want to shout out to the nations in BC, says many of them stepped forward way back when to be pilots for this. And they let us do it. They let us learn stuff and make some mistakes, so you can learn from all of them. Well, what was the biggest things that they would tell you? Well, they would say that, jurisdiction is something that comes from the community. They have to give you the authority to get it. And it can't just be you produce a law and they vote, right? It has to be that ground-up swell in order to be successful. Jurisdiction isn't just an agreement. You got to have all the pieces you need. You need to have the funding to do it. Don't buy into the trap of, oh, we'll give you jurisdiction and we'll talk money later. Like, that is one of the oldest tricks in Canada's playbook, right? The money never comes. So you need readiness, resources,